Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Join me each week as I speak with amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as we are all part of a larger interconnected community. We discuss everything from career stories, lessons learned, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, welcome to the conversation. And if you like this episode, please do me a favor by hitting subscribe, like, or share it with a friend. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own unique career journey. On today's episode of the mentorDINO podcast, I would like to welcome Yiselle Santos Rivera, architect, professor, and organizational leader in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Yiselle, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. I'm very happy to be here. It's a true joy. And I'm looking forward to our chat today.
And I know we've talked before in the past, but in case my listeners don't know anything about you, do you mind introducing yourself to let everybody know a little bit about your experience and journey so far in your education and career?
Yes, and thank you again for the invitation. I'm an architect, licensed for about 5 years. I grew up in Puerto Rico, born and raised. I am a medical planner. I've been working in healthcare for about 10 years. Now I'm a professor at Howard University, trying to start the first HBCU healthcare architecture program. And I'm loving every minute of it. I also have started a private practice at the intersection of healthcare architecture, organizational design, and leadership design. So it's really about how we care for people. How do we build resilience within an organization, and how we can potentially do the same when we align and co-create and do participatory design with our clients. So it's a bit of an intersection of how to prepare our leaders to be great leaders and great firm owners, how to use that same skill set to create great organizational design, how to use that skill set to become great collaborators and great conveners when we partner with firms or with our clients, and how do we create a thriving community within the architecture profession, architects, and with our communities and the work that we do.
And you're also a PhD, or going for your PhD. I know that too. You have so much going on. So
yeah, I guess I really like to keep busy. I'm pursuing a doctorate in psychology, which is the root of why I'm interested in organizational design and organizational leadership and psychology. Not only because it allows me to learn more about leadership skills and about myself and how to become a better leader, but how I can help architects and professionals become the best mentors and best leaders that they can be. And during this process of my doctoral degree, I learned that my school is also very interested in the power of design to heal and help communities. So we are all very vested in this process of learning about leadership, architecture, design. And my focus on the concentration is neuroscience, because at the root, there are biases and there are things within ourselves that show up intrinsically in how we do our work and how we show up for other people. So if we are able to really harness that value that we bring in our own diversity, in our own essence of how we feel as people and how we act as people, I think we can become really phenomenal architects.
Yeah. And even though you're doing so many different things, as you talk about it, they're so intertwined to the same mission of what you're doing. So even though, like, if you look on paper, it looks like you are doing so many things, but then when you explain it, it's like, oh, well, this interconnects into here, and this is how this reacts over here, and hitting different avenues of inclusion in architecture, health in architecture, and us as humans, because we aren't just beings, we're not robots. Like, there is emotion behind design and how we interact with space.
100%. And I'm glad that you we're able to perceive that so quickly, because you're right. On paper, it seems like I'm incredibly chaotic, maybe even a little schizophrenic, which who knows, right? But there's a sequence and there's a pattern and a logic around each of the steps that I take. And I love to talk about that with students as well. When they ask me, what should I do next? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go an MBA? Should I do another master's? What would prepare me best to do architecture? That's a really hard question to answer, but I try to share my experience and say, every moment in my career, I have imagined where I wanted to be and where I wanted to act and how I wanted to lead, but it wasn't in the thinking of where I wanted to get to. It was in the process of actually moving through these spaces that those connections started happening. And I realized, as long as you have an idea of where you want to get to and the things that drive you and you're passionate about, things start to connect inadvertently. The universe always takes you to where you want to get to. And the more you align with your passion and your purpose, the easier it is for you to pave your own path. And those opportunities start to come to you, which is very similar, I'm sure, Caitlin, with what you're doing. You knew that you wanted to create an impact in a certain way, and you found mentorDINO as an avenue to create it. And now you're incredibly passionate about it. You're creating an impact because of what you're doing. But I imagine when you were a student in architecture, or even teaching or in practice, you weren't thinking, oh, I know exactly that I'm going to create this mentorship opportunity. Even when we're trying to be incredibly strategic, we may never have a glimpse of where we actually will get to be and become, until we're there and we look back and we go, this was inevitable. I inevitably would have done this. I inevitably would have pursued a degree in psychology because I'm passionate about people. Of course, I ended up a director at JEDI because I care about all of our differences and our commonalities. And I love educating people. So even if I would have never guessed that I would have become a director of JEDI, a professor at Howard, and doing a doctorate in psychology, of course I was going to end up here. The universe was going to lead me to where I am today. And who knows where I'll be, even next year. Maybe I will be president of AIA. And maybe all of this trajectory and all of these pieces that seem so displaced will clearly speak to the things that I'm passionate about and the impact that I want to make in the world. So that's why I love being in these spaces, because I get to meet people like you that connect with that mindset. Traditional architecture is phenomenal, but you never know where you will be and the kind of impact that you will be making in 5 years. Just do the things that you love to do. Even if you have to do them on the side, the universe will get you where you need to get to.
Yeah, exactly. I know when I was a student at Kent State, I actually started working on the healthcare certificate program that they had, because they were just going through all that accreditation. Because I was like, I want to help people. I knew I wanted to help people and impact. I had done research in oncology because my mom had gone through cancer. So I already had that connection of, I want to help this different type of patient subjects, because they are different patients that are coming in on a regular basis. So even doing that research, I didn't finish the certificate because I was ready to just be done and graduate. I was done with academia, but I still do some healthcare. And even before going on maternity leave, I was working on an oncology project. But it's that passion of people that that's where the passion was. And that's where mentorDINO came in. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I was trying to plug it into architecture, but sometimes it has to be slightly outside of architecture. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would have realized that until I had actual project experience in the field and had some very tough issues and challenges early in my career that then started to fuel the flames and guide me in my path. But as a student, I was just very closed-minded, I would say, on I want to work for an architecture firm and do great design and project work. And you're just thinking about that. And there's so many more paths and avenues you can take your career, even while still being an architect and doing other things. I've thought about teaching. So there's so many different paths that you can take. And it's just, you have to get your feet wet and discover it and be able to pivot and, guide your career on whatever life throws at you.
I love that. That's very beautiful.
Yeah. But I wanted to touch into your you being a director of JEDI at HKS and starting to go into those roles. I know shifting from architect day to day to being a director and doing strategic planning is a pretty different role. And sometimes people struggle letting go of that design and architecture side. So how was your experience shifting from like day-to-day architecture work to strategic and director focused work?
I have to say it was not only a mindset shift, but an identity in a way shift and an opportunity to rethink many of the biases that I lived by. As I was learning about architecture, I was learning about being in the US as opposed to Puerto Rico, about being a woman and all of these things. When I started architecture professionally, I started working in large firms, and I was within a studio, I was within a practice, I was within a role, and I could shift slightly. When I was working on projects, I was a project architect at times, I was a designer, I even did CA. I worked on developing guide sheets while I was in one of the firms. So I did technical BIM, I did design, I was engaged in volunteering. And that was my idea of architecture and practice. It was falling within these particular roles and titles and categories throughout my career, depending on the projects, depending on the work that I wanted to do, whether it was volunteer or within practice and professionally. Shifting to corporate America, being a leader, a director, shifted me from a local satellite office, which is what DC HKS was at the time, to a corporate level role, which meant it was a very broad, and at the beginning, of course, shallow conversation, because I didn't understand what that meant. It was very much a mindset shift, going from thinking about architecture in DC, thinking about my intervention in projects. I had a very dedicated small team. I was in large firms, but I was still in small teams doing phenomenal work. I had been at HKS for 4 years doing solely healthcare, which I absolutely loved, locally and nationally, which is fantastic. And then I was thrust into a very managerial, strategic, global thinking role. I have to say, value alignment was fantastic because I grew up in Puerto Rico. My love and my passion for cultures has always existed. Thinking strategically, which I didn't realize at the time that's what it was, thinking about the big picture and how the system works together to enable people to do the best work that they can do was very important, but also understanding the individuality and how the identity and how people show up at work creates or enables a lot of those differences to make a difference in their day-to-day. So reconciling those spaces was very intriguing, and also reconciling or recognizing that my idea of a global firm had to also shift. I was no longer thinking about DC, about healthcare. I was thinking now about a global firm with many practices, with 3 sectors, about 1,600 people in the entire world. And I was not only thinking about the East Coast or regionally, I had to think of the impact that the firm and my actions were going to have, not only for the people that I knew, but people that I may never meet in places that I may never visit, and the impact that then those people were going to have in the places that they reside and in their offices. And I still find that incredibly enriching. It's very exciting. I'm a problem solver, and I love risk and I love challenges, but I did not realize the mindset shift that would require. now I needed to understand my place in a system, what my identity could, or how my identity was reflected in the system. I needed to understand all the players within the system. Even, and very simplistically, I wanted to understand our organizational design, how we were reporting, how we were communicating, how information was being disseminated from a strategic level to a personal level. I needed to understand how managers worked with each other, how regions worked with each other, how practices worked with each other, which I know for many people, it may seem like it's a little disconnected from architecture and their standard view of architecture, but it's exactly the same thing. How do you break up all of the phases of design in a way that makes sense in one transition from another? How do you understand teams within the ecosystem of practices? How do you determine titles and job titles? How do you connect all of these things at a corporate level, at a systems level, so that the practices thrive, so that the regions thrive, so that we can do better recruiting? That's a different way of thinking about design and strategy, which we use, of course, all the time in design. How do we talk to clients? How do we pitch a project? How do we more persuasively talk about our values? How do they align with a client? How do they misalign? How do we abide by codes? And how do we volunteer? How do we position our firm? All of those things have to do with architecture, because architecture is a practice, architecture is a business, and architecture is also strategy, and architecture is a philosophy and its values. And that's one of the reasons I'm very intrigued about the intersection of organizational design and architecture and design thinking. All of those things are interrelated if we really think that architecture is about people. People are the ones that put designs together. People are the ones that impacted by design, and people are the ones that live through the design that you created. So all I'm trying to do is start to break up all of these components in our society and our systems and how they relate to the built environment and how we can become better agents of the built environment, so that ultimately everybody that experiences our buildings can thrive and feel like we're being responsive and future thought leaders for the work that they need to do for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it's just a different type of design problem, ultimately. It's just a design
100%.
problem from a
design
system
problems.
than a built structure and how that all operates. And it's just like engineering is a design problem. It's just with different types of either mechanical heating and cooling type of problems and movement rather than people movement like architects go through. So I think it's all connected. But again, I didn't realize that until I got into the profession. I'm like, oh, there's this whole other design problem that nobody tells you about that people still need to work through because we're humans and we change. So it's not like what we did 20 years ago works today, or what we did a few years ago works today. It's an ever-changing type of design problem. And I know with a large firm, there can be so many different cultures around all the different cities. Like it's fairly simple when you're just in a solo office and that is the culture, that is what's going on. And I know when I joined a large national firm, I'm like, oh, there's some different cultures going on. And as you go to office, there's different players. Even if you work cross offices and work with a variety of people, each office has its own individual culture. So were there common challenges that you've found not only from the industry side, but being on a national firm with so many people in offices?
Absolutely. And you mentioned it beautifully. When we talk about diversity, when we talk about equity, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about belonging, even though it can be, and it has been very politicized, the terminology that has been used has been a development of many years, many centuries of trying to understand people within a system. So we have to call it diversity because we're different. We have to call it equity because we understand the system enables some more than others because it's a system. But at the core of the conversation, we're really always talking about people. And people are not monoliths. People are very complex. Not only are there differences based on gender and race, age, sexual orientation, which are typically the things that people think about when they think about DEI or think about diversity and think about differences. We also, of course, have to think about regional differences, geographical differences, the way we grew up, whether we grew up in the States, whether we're first generation in this country, immigrants, whether we went to an all-girl Catholic school, whether we learned in public school. All of these things form so much of how we think and how we navigate the world and how we understand the world. So not only do we experience challenges within each office when we work in teams, even if you're doing it in academia or if you're doing it at a large firm or a small firm, unless you're a solo practitioner and you still have to work with clients, you're constantly working with different people. And even if we're both women, even if we're both white, even if we're both the same age, we will experience a lot of those differences. So every time I had the privilege of working with a firm, working with an office, working with a team, the challenges were always different. And I loved that. Of course, I don't love that we all have to go through challenges all the time, but there's so much richness in how those differences make a difference in our day-to-day and uncovering how those differences make a difference. It's what's really critical and important. And I think sometimes we forget that we are all people that experience the world differently, that our differences like how the cost of living, how we approach legal issues, how we understand, how we learn, how we take care of other people. All of those things, those silent differences or not visual differences can be the way that we engage with them in an office at a team can be very challenging because not everybody's very comfortable sharing those things that are not evident. And many of us don't realize how those differences actually make a difference in our day-to-day. So working in DC and my understanding of DC and the reason I was DC aligned very much with my values of growing up in Puerto Rico, very liberal, democratic, a colony, very international, very transient. All of these things were very normal to me. I'm very transient. I grew up in Puerto Rico. It was very easy for me to relate to DC. When I started working with Florida, Texas, Colorado, California, Phoenix, I started to realize how many biases I had of my perception of the United States. I grew up and I learned English watching TV, Nickelodeon, Mickey Mouse Club, like all of these things that I had in my toolkit because my parents allowed me the opportunity to do those things or have those things. I had TV in my room when I was little. I had a computer at 13, which makes me more of a millennial than a Gen Xer. I created this idea of the United States in my head that was somewhat reinforced by going to school at Syracuse, incredibly enough, and then being in DC, being confronted with my own biases in trying to help teams in Chicago, Phoenix, Denver, had an effect on me. And the recognition that every time we deal with teams, every time we deal with clients, every time we're working with people, it doesn't matter even if we are part of the community, we sort of have to start from zero. We have to start with where are we as people? How do we communicate together? How do we goal set together? How do we understand each other? And how do we find alignment so that we can actually do the work that we want to do together in the most effective way? And that means learning about who we are, how we work with other people, what we tolerate, where our boundaries, how we understand the world, even how we understand the goal that we have in place. That's always going to be challenging, but I think that's where I found my love for architecture which was rooted in Puerto Rico, which architecture was about building community, and building community is about getting to know people. And my role as an architect was trying to understand how to best connect people, have them collaborate better. How do we distill the content in an effective way? And how do we get people to share their authentic voice so that we can better tailor the outcomes to how it's better going to support them long term? And it doesn't matter whether people are in the same team, they've been working together for a long time, or they are a global team with 50 offices. Challenges were always going to be different and new and exciting and also terrifying and would require a little bit of risk taking. But getting people to be in that space where they welcome that it can be very, very exciting as well.
Yeah, because I've definitely been part of those teams that we all felt safe to voice an opinion, safe to ask questions, or I would say argue or discuss through challenges and which way we wanted to go and not have hurt feelings. It's no, I don't like that. Can we look at it this way? Or I don't understand this. And those teams were the high functioning teams because we had that safety. But every team, it's just a snapshot in time because you never know who's going to move on to another firm or when you're going to have even a different engineer. If the architecture team stays the same, you're going to have different dynamics because you have a different client, different users, different engineers, that it's always evolving. And I feel like we always just want to jump into design way too fast. And we don't take the time to learn about each other first because we're all moving at lightning speed on our teams. And so you almost have to learn on the fly, which then can create some drama and issues as every team tries to figure out the new system for that project and what they need to do. Plus, if they have to learn a new client and what that client is doing and what biases they have. And so it can be a struggle to figure it out as you go. But I think it leads us into the company you launched, YSR. And so that you launched in 2023. So what was your mission in starting that business to leave an impact a different way?
I think I may have to bring you along to be part of my pitch. It's exactly what you just mentioned. Going into a team where there's a lot of trust can feel very empowering, which creates outcomes like high performance, more innovation, better camaraderie, safety, trust, transparency. And those teams can bring the most joy and typically have the least amount of RFIs. That is proven. So there's a huge ROI in building trust amongst teams and people. And what I was noticing, and I'm sure you felt that way, not only in working firms, but in academia, architects are trained to do phenomenal work. They're trained to think about design and problem solving. We're not necessarily taught to be great conveners and collaborators, to be great team members. I'm now at Howard University, and most students recognize that when you're asking for group projects, they're going to experience the most challenge. So if you give them a choice, they will likely not choose to work on a group project. The first thought that comes to mind is, well, you're going to likely struggle a bit as an architect because the likelihood of you having to work on a team, even if it is a house or a detached home, a house, a row house, even if you're just working with clients, you're still going to work with people. You may still need support from the county. You may still need support from consultants. You will always most likely need to collaborate and do work. And architecture, in my opinion, is about community, and it's about centering people in community. So you will always have to work with people, for people, or because of people. We don't get taught in most universities. I know it's a core value for Howard, and it was in Puerto Rico, that architecture is intrinsically related to how we work with others. So what I wanted to do with YSR was learn how to build trust in teams, learn how to create transparency, establish these frameworks so that they can be repeatable and maintainable systems. And of course, I love architecture, so I wanted to focus on architecture firms, on design firms, recognizing how we are taught to be architects, recognizing the needs and the fast pace of the architecture profession, is also the interior design profession. I thought that I could merge both together and help support teams to do great work together, work on strategic initiatives at an organizational level, help the profession, and enable itself to find the right language to talk about architecture outside of architecture, because we know that architects love architecting about architecture all the time to architects. So if we 100%. Are better able, it's pretty phenomenal. So if we are better able to communicate what architecture means to us in a way that everybody can learn and it resonates with everybody, use that language to better connect with clients, to create better outcomes, it would help sustain the profession longer and further. And I would also hope that those skill sets that I learn and I teach at an organization level could help me partner with firms as a community consultant or as a convener to help better bring clients into the fold, because I'm learning that I'm better positioned to, not only because of the doctorate program, but I love to discuss about architecture in a way that people understand it and connects with their heart viscerally. So if I'm able to help firms that may not have the same skill set, which I'm not saying everybody should have the exact same skill set. I know I'm not a phenomenal designer, but I can talk my way into and out of anything. If I can better help clients understand where we're coming from, and I can better help designers understand how to bridge the gap between communities and clients, I think we would all thrive. So I'm hoping to better help people be better spokespeople about architecture. If they are unable to do so, I would love to facilitate and bridge that gap. But I would also love to mentor at an organizational level and also help organizations build that strategic mindset to build resilience within their organizations, in lieu of having to hire big organizational firms like Deloitte and Slaloms, because I already understand the field and hopefully I can better bridge the gap to build their capacity and help them better sustain their firms long-term and build succession planning as well.
Yeah, because that's what I've heard a lot of feedback from firm owners is when they are trying to bring in somebody to help them with team building or anything with their own systems. It's hard when you bring in somebody outside of the AEC industry that hasn't experienced it because it's so unique. And there's different team dynamics than just a corporate business banking world. It is sure got a corporate ladder, but there's a design flair, there's egos, there's other things based on our education that kind of changes our biases to go down a certain direction that can create some friction. I always joked if I were a professor of studio, which maybe I'll challenge you this since you're a studio professor, is do a jury where nobody on the jury is an architect and have the students learn to present their design to people who can't speak architecture, may not be able to understand a floor plan, to get those vocal muscles prepared, because every jury I've been in, it's either studio professors or architects they pull out of the community, and then they just want you to talk this architect speak that you sure may have a crit on a wall to go through a messy project, but I don't know how many. I maybe put one presentation every other year to architects, whereas I'm generally making presentations every single day for non-architects or people who may have left the industry. So they have knowledge base, but it's to users that have no idea about architecture. And they just want to know, will they have a locked cabinet for their stuff and keeping everything very open-minded, or they don't want to change. They go, this is how we have it now. And they don't care that it's dysfunctional or a problem. They just know what they know, and people hate change. So that's where I would have challenged the professors. Even if you wanted a studio jury of architects to do an architect one, I would still do one with non-architects just to test it out. Because then you never know. Some designs may sparkle more, or certain people present better to architects versus non-architects. So that would be my challenge.
Well,
as
I
your
love
studio.
that you mentioned that, because the last 2 weeks of my semester were dedicated to that, because it was the first time that I was trying this, and there were a lot of challenges with timing. You live and learn. It was my first time trying this out. The week before the presentation, I required the students to provide me a script of their presentation and do a full dry run of the presentation as if I were a client. But I couldn't get more people to come in, non-architects, to view it. But that's my hope. And something really wonderful with Howard is that my co-lecturer, Dr. Monty Harris, is a plastic surgeon. So we are starting to bring in psychologists, clinicians, and the hope is for next year to have somewhat regular intervals where descorates are more formal with architects and maybe even people that would be on the direct client side for their particular projects, but also bring in people that have no understanding of what's happening, have some kind of relationship with the outcome, if it's a nursing school or radio station, that may have an opinion, and see how well they tell the story. I'm a big fan of storytelling, and a big component of healthcare is storytelling. It's really about how you connect as an individual, as a designer, with the project, which you shared. And I'm sad to hear that you had that experience, but I imagine the value of that experience as well, and how many of us end up in healthcare. Many healthcare architects, when they go and pitch a project to a client, if it's oncology, if it's pediatrics, if it is dialysis, there's a very clear connection with the client and what they're doing. When the architect comes in and expresses a direct lived experience as a patient, as somebody that has had that in their family, they establish that clear connection with the client. And the client already knows that person understands the outcome, understands the why behind these buildings and why the function needs to be present even more than the form, but how the form relates to it. They love this. They really want to connect with the person that's doing the design. And I remember discussing this with a student, and I said, well, now that you're in healthcare studio, what's the difference? And they said, before I didn't feel like I could share who I am and why I care about this as a student. Now I feel like this is part of how I present my deliverable. And I said, absolutely. That is something that I love about healthcare. And a reason that I was drawn to healthcare is because there is a direct link between how you feel about the work that you're going to do and why the form and the function have to deliver an outcome a certain way, and how that patient, that clinician, that doctor is also going to experience the environment. And for them, it was sort of an aha moment. And I said, now do you understand why I've been talking to you so much about the story? What is the story? Why does it matter? Who are the personas that you're trying to target? How do you embody that passion and that vision? And how do you translate that into an architecture that actually does what it needs to do for the client? That's what I want to teach. And I love that you mentioned it, because if we bring people that are not architects, they're going to tell you how they feel. They're going to tell you exactly how they feel about the experience that they had in that building, whether they were the patient, whether they were a caregiver, whether they just going there for, they had to get something there. They will let you know if what you're thinking will be the outcome of your design will actually impact and be the thing that connects to them. So I love that. I may bring you in. I may zoom you in to one of my crits and challenge the students to share a story that is compelling, that aligns perfectly with their design, so that their deliverable or an outcome is evident. It had to be this building in this location to do this thing for these people. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. I know I had a conversation with a young professional. He's only 2 years into his career, and he had to redesign a PT renovated space. And he has gone through a lot of PT because he has back problems. And that was the first project where he has been a patient prior to doing the work. And when he talked about, he wanted to call and just chat through what his plan layout was, and the way he talked about it was so different than the other projects that I've worked with him on. I'm like, that's because you've got the experience now. Oncology, I always have the caregiver hat on, and I always say the future patient, because I always say cancer is more inevitable in my family. I'm like, I'm going to have it, and it's going to be breast cancer, and this is what it's going to be. And so I'm going future patient and, current caregiver. But now that I have a newborn and going through the whole process of labor and delivery, being in triage way too long, I will now be an advocate that all triage rooms should be larger, because I was stuck in one for over 3 hours because labor and delivery was full. And so I'm like, you know what? If I have to judge any type of women's health type of project, people better be prepared, because I've been through so many different unique situations that you shouldn't be in triage for that long. Triage is supposed to be quick. You're in and out. Those rooms are small. And when you're stuck in there, and my husband only has a wooden chair to sit in for hours, and I've got no space, it's a very different space than I should have been in this other room type. But it's because I'm a design professional and I'm like, no, this isn't right. Then it drives me nuts. Or when I got wheeled into the OR for the first time, I was very much awake in the OR. Not everybody's awake in the OR. I'm judging lights. I'm like, why did the electrical engineer put this way to distract myself from being a patient? Or when I go to the ER, I'm like, oh, I understand why the interior designer did this, but when the doors close, this is really dumb. I'm like, I'm never going to have this done. I'm like, I'm a horrible patient. My husband just tells me to turn my head off because he is not an architect by any means. But
it sounds like you're a phenomenal architect. That's what it sounds like to me.
I try to just get people to be a patient or something. If they don't understand ADA, go be in a wheelchair for a day. Now I'm like looking at, even the pediatrics and carrying my daughter around, and she's very much like the intense artificial lights. I'm like, oh, I'm turning off all the lights in my house. I'm like, I got to go buy lamps and do things differently, because how you're watching her experience the world, and she can't even see very far yet. And it's what things are contrasting her. The lights in our pediatrician, they're not up down lights, they're all just incandescent straight down. And I'm like, I just want to renovate their space. I'm like, this is so much of a struggle for her. I'm like, now I bring a little like canopy. I'm like, they need to do this differently.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, I used to wear a poker visor in the office, because even though my eyes are dark colored, which I shouldn't have that big of an issue with light, but I'm very light sensitive. So because they rearranged the furniture, it wasn't aligned with the rows of incandescent lights. So I had to wear a visor because I couldn't see the screen. After a while, it strained so bad and people are walking by. I'm like, I either wear a baseball cap or something a little bit better, which is a poker hat. And everybody made fun of me, but it's totally fine. What I love about this conversation, and thank you very much, is reinforcing the value of lived experience. And that's why let's frame it. Let's don't talk about DEI. Let's talk about people first. Lived experience will never be overshadowed by adjacency. Like, you can tell me anything about your experience as a caregiver, as a new mother, all of these things. As much as I would love to internalize what you're telling me and try to live through it, adjacency is not the lived experience. I will never feel the way that you felt, acknowledge the things that you did. And I think that's why people first and DEI and all of these things are so important, because they will never be somebody else's lived experience. I would rather you be the LDRP, labor and delivery architect, than me. I'm not going to have kids. I'm already 46. That likelihood of that happening is slim. Who knows? But if anybody's going to design a labor and delivery suite, if I have to do it, of course, not every person wants to do it. I would love to have continued reviews with you about the space so that you can comment. I would love to have people in the team that have had that experience. If I'm designing an oncology suite and I'm thinking about the caregiver, you would be the phenomenal person to be in the room and a collaborator to help me understand the things that you had to go through. And even though, yes, you had to go through that experience, your experiences also be unique. So having more people share their unique experiences, that's so valuable. And being in tune with what you know and what you don't know about how to become a great architect and a great facilitator, it takes a lot of self-analysis and a lot of vulnerability and humility. I would rather collaborate with you in a project, even if I was given and anointed to do XY project, because I know that you're going to be the person to bring the more valuable insights into the space. I'll detail it. I'll draw it. I'll do all that and gain that experience. But bringing you at the front end and bringing people that have had that lived experience at the front end of the project, it's invaluable.
Yeah. And especially when you are in firms that have people even in-house, those are the opportunities to do a design crit, not just to the whole firm. It's who's had those experiences to pull them in, or has their spouse had that lived experience. Can you bring them in during a lunch hour or Zoom call them if they're busy between work meetings to get those perceptions, just to get that feedback?
That even sounds fun.
Yeah.
That even sounds really fun. Break up the day. I love it.
Exactly. But it also leads me to my other question on mentorship, and how have mentors specifically impacted your own career path?
Oh, goodness. I would not be here without mentors and sponsors, the good ones and the not so great ones. The ones that, as one of them told me, saw that I had a big flame, a lot of energy, and they were really open to help me channel it in a way that was useful and fruitful, given their lived experience and what they knew. The mentors that also challenged me and how I communicated, how I engaged in the work that I was doing. The ones that told me, you're going too fast, you're rushing too much, you're doing too much. I know that they were feeling that they were being good mentors. It took me a while to understand what they were trying to say. At the moment, the delivery may not have been great, but once you step back and you realize that they're telling you what they need to tell you, given their experience and how they're receiving you in the moment, has always been very important for me. So paying attention to what people have said, how people have responded to me, to my challenges, to the things that I've not necessarily known how to speak about, has been really empowering. There have been many moments in my life where I felt stuck, and being able to reach out to people and being honest and vulnerable and having them see me and my vulnerability and trusting that with all my challenges and with all of the things that I am and embody, that they were able to see through all of that and focus and help me, even through their lens, hone in on something very critical and very important about myself and help me grow, has been invaluable. And I love that my mentors have not been only senior people in the profession, or only women, or only men, or only architects. It has been very valuable. I always say, when people ask me, what is the one thing that you would tell your younger self? I was like, be willing to take risks. Nothing is the end of the world. Valuable information comes from many voices in different ways. Always take those things and take the best of those comments. But also recognize that you do have an inner voice that will continue to push you to align with your values. So even when people that you thought were mentors might have misaligned, see that as an opportunity for you to shift and find better alignment. So mentors for me throughout my profession have arrived in many different ways. And if it weren't for each one of them, I wouldn't be where I am. One saw me when they asked me to be a jury for candidates that wanted to run for office for the AIA. I was in the room just speaking about the candidates. And somebody said, have you thought of running for AIA office? And I just, no, it never occurred to me. I thought I had to do this. I thought I had to be that. And they said, no, walk out the room. We're going to have a little conversation. I literally walked out the room. And like 3 minutes later, I was called back in. And they said, would you like to become an at-large director for the AIA chapter? And I was baffled. And it was one of those moments that I just thought, wow, they must see something in me that I'm not seeing. But of course, I'm going to say yes to this opportunity and take advantage of it. These things don't always happen. And right now it happened in a way that I wasn't even asking for it. So the universe must have a plan, even if I will not sleep for the next year. And I've had mentors look at me and say, you need to shut up or leave. And they forced me to have to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And when I was not willing to make the decision, the universe did it for me. And then I realized how powerful that mentorship opportunity could have been if I would have seen it for what it was. A lot of people, most people, hopefully, have best intentions in mind. And if you see them as people really thinking about your well-being and your future, and you mirror that or echo that against your values, it will inevitably help you get to where you need to get to, even if it's a bumpy journey.
Yeah, because I think when you're stuck in that like crossroads, it's so easy to say, yeah, you see two paths in front of you, just pick one. And it's easy to say that when you're not on that path staring at it. When you're staring at it, like I have friends that were laid off in the COVID recession, you can call it, but they needed that push. I'm like, no, you're now doing something so much better because now you're crafting something at a different scale because architecture wasn't the right scale, but you needed that push because you were comfortable. You enjoyed being where you were, but you weren't happy. And so sometimes you need that universe push. So yes. Even though it was a negative thing and, not, a positive experience, that push led them to be in a better place today than where they were. So, but I do want to bring up the AIA since you brought up kind of how you roped into the AIA DC chapter presidency. But I know so many people struggle to figure out if they should get involved in the AIA, how they can get involved, what's in it for them. It is not a cheap organization to be involved in. So sometimes it's a big step. Not all firms help cover those costs. So do you have advice for any professionals looking to get involved in the AIA, or what got you first into that room that then led you to the presidency of DC?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. And it goes back to mentorship and building trust and relationships. Sometimes this is the way that I view it. I'm going to try and keep it brief. And when you're working in any profession, I think, especially things that require deliverables and working in teams, and you're always sort of pressed for time, and it's very easy to focus and to get siloed into focusing on a project, on your deliverable, and doing a good job and maintaining your paycheck. There's, especially if you're coming from, a colony or a scarcity mindset, which many of us have experienced at some point in our life, given our circumstances. You're always thinking, you don't want to lose your job. You want to focus on doing a good job. You want to focus at times on keeping your head down. Some of us have a lot of drive and we want to take on more and we want to have greater impact. But many of us worry about the paycheck. Things that I valued and loved about the AIA is that I could have impact in the profession without having to burden my anxiety or have anxiety about my paycheck. It was a volunteer opportunity. I could begin it and end it at my pace. It inevitably would have an impact on the profession, I would hope, but it wasn't necessarily going to impact my day-to-day. I was not going to likely lose my job or lose a paycheck for trying something new, for building a committee, for asking a question. A lot of these committees and a lot of these spaces are rooted in alignment with values. You want to do something to help your community. Like I built AIA because I wanted to speak about architecture in Spanish, and I wanted to go and teach high school or even pre-K and elementary school about architecture in Spanish. I could do that for a limited amount of time. I could volunteer some time. I could balance what I was doing in practice versus what I was doing volunteering, and not only learn about leadership skills, but learn about other people that cared about the same things that I did. I could feed two birds with one stone, learn about architecture, learn about the environment that I was in DC and what it allowed, and how I could engage architecture at a public level. But it'll also help me rethink about practice. I would get to connect with people that worked in other practices, maybe even other disciplines, maybe different ways of viewing architecture. And I could learn about all of these things and bring it back to my firm. It helped me connect and build my village outside of my firm, which also allowed me more flexibility and resilience if anything happened within my firm, or if there were relationships that kind of misaligned or maybe misaligned with my values. There were other places that I knew better aligned, or I could better decide the kind of leader that I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. So even though it is a big expense, the AIA helped me become the leader that I am today because it allowed me to bring perspective outside of my firm and my sphere of influence. It allowed me to grow my sphere of influence. It allowed me to tap into things and issues that were of interest to me, like the archipac, how we advocate at a political level. It broadened my perspective of what an architect can be and can do outside of traditional practice. I could touch on topics that were not directly related to my day-to-day, like AI, the ethics of AI. How do we talk about architecture to the public? How do we encourage architecture as a profession in communities that are underrepresented already? So even though it is costly, I think long-term there is an ROI, even if it is networking, even if it's just networking, even if it is that you can choose the kind of things that you learn, the kind of CEUs that you have access to. the kind of leader that you want to emulate and align yourself with that you may never have in your firm because of your location or practice. I think there is a huge ROI in becoming engaged in 100,000 member organization that is looking to sustain the value of your profession, not only within the US, but globally. It's a different perspective. And I think when you have different perspective, you can have more choices. And when you have better choices, you can get closer to what it is that is a better add to your life as a human being, professionally and in practice. So I hope that people find value in the AIA as an opportunity to build a committee, to learn something new, to learn why they care about bylaws like I do, which is weird. You can learn about accounting. You can learn about legal issues. You can learn about politics. You can learn about how to better communicate in cities, how to make an impact in your neighborhood.
Yeah, that's how I always try to explain it, because it's hard when somebody's, fresh out of school, they've, got the AREs, firm projects, like all these other things. And you're setting your future self up. Like, what can you do today to help future you? And so you may not see the value up front until you're in your position, and then reflecting back, and then you're like, oh my gosh, this led to this and over here. And then I was in this room, which led me over here. And so you never know where something's going to take you. And that organization can open up a lot of doors.
So I love that you said this, because I haven't pitched anything, and I know this is going to come out after the presidential race, but my tagline is a future ready AIA, because I think that's what the AIA should be, and it is doing in many aspects. But the AIA, for me, is an organization and an association that's meant to build resiliency for our profession. So it's really about being future ready. How do you create a future ready organization? How do you create future ready firms that are built on resilience, especially since now there are conversations that right now may hint to a possible recession. I think some conversations feel like that is inevitable, others are a little bit more hopeful. So the AIA should be the organization to help us become future ready in our profession as people, as practitioners, and as advocates for the profession and the built environment overall.
Yeah, definitely. And I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question. And it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their careers?
Take risks. Nothing is the end of the world. It's just death and taxes. So just worry about, let me rephrase. The biggest advice that I would give young professionals is understand yourselves, understand your value, understand the things that you want to create in the world, the kind of impact that you want to have, and try as best as possible to align yourself with those values in a greater way every step you take. You may not check all the boxes with every decision, but try for that decision that you make, every chance that you have, to get you closer to greater alignment with your values. But know that from the get-go, you may not hit all of the boxes. It may not align perfectly with your values, but the more that you engage in learning about those values, as in practice, like you said, Caitlin, as you mentioned, it wasn't until you were in practice that you realized the things that you cared about. Take those chances, take those risks, slowly but surely, learn everything that you can, take every advantage of every opportunity. And the more that you understand, the greater alignment in your values that you will clarify, and make sure that every decision that you make moving forward is in greater alignment. Even if it doesn't feel perfect, it will lead you to where you need to go sooner rather than later. Yeah. But I think students, and this happened to me and it happens constantly, I think we have to make the perfect decision every time. and that we have to have all our ducks in a row in order to be effective, I think we feel like we have to have everything figured out. And that every decision that we make is a final decision. It isn't. Even if the choice is completely wrong, now you know better. Just take advantage of the decision, just make a decision, and move forward with it.
Yeah, as much as we learn, lessons learned on projects, there's lessons learned in career and what steps you want to take. And sometimes you misstep and you can step back. That's fine.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to thank you so much, Yiselle, for taking the time to speak with me. I know you have so much going on and wish you best of luck with the presidency. I know this will go out after we find out on the candidacy, but I always look forward to speaking with you. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I love that you're doing this. I love that this is your journey in architecture, still an architect, and that you're finding a way that empowers you and makes you happy to make a beautiful impact on our profession. So thank you for the privilege to be here. I know you have a lot on your plate as well. So thank you for taking time to continue to do this when you have a lot of other things as well to take care of. So thank you for your time as well.
Yep. You never know what life will throw at you. So
amen.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.